ESL comms were kind of funny, in my opinion. I don't even care. We were all on Adderall.
Since the very dawn of video gaming, there's always been an air of competition to it. The very first video game, Pong, was a competitive game. Back in the day, kids would spend hours at arcades trying to beat high scores, but this aspect of competition reached an all-time high in the age of competitive matchmaking. Esports brought this competition to a new level by means of making these events publicized and putting money on the line. These aspects led to players trying to find any advantage they could that could help them secure that epic victory royale. Professional sports of any variety are not unfamiliar with their players' use of illicit substances or performance-enhancing drugs, such as steroids, and esports are no different. Although when you're not competing with your body and rather your mind, there's a different way to enhance your performance. Thanks for stopping by. My name's Jake, also known as Heckaber, and today we're going to explore a little bit deeper into this. This is Adderall's effect on video gaming. This is where Adderall comes into the mix. Among several other study drugs, as they're called, Adderall is the choice PED of esports athletes. Adderall is a medication that is typically used to treat ADHD. It's an amphetamine salt stimulant which increases a person's focus and attentiveness and helps with organizational tasks. And I'm sure you could see how this would affect a player's performance. Adderall isn't the only drug used by players though. More study drugs like Vyvanse or Ritalin, used to improve focus, or marijuana to help calm the nerves of stressful competitive environments, are used fairly often to gain an edge. Adderall specifically, though, is a very controversial topic in the esports and gaming world, and it is one of, if not the most widely used drug in competitive gaming, and has been used by players for a long time, even dating back to the days of competitive StarCraft. In most leagues, such as the Electronic Sports League, the use of any form of drugs, alcohol, and PEDs are banned, although the phrasing of the rule can be quite vague, typically only saying something along the lines of, the player must not be under the influence of any substance of abuse. Adderall and other study drugs are never specifically named, which can lead to some confusion, especially for those who are actually prescribed these. This is paired with the fact that these rules weren't particularly well regulated, and the rule was somewhat there for formality's sake, and the use of these substances was very often overlooked. This was of course taken advantage of heavily by many players and competitors. The first real time this was addressed was back in 2015 during an ESL 1 tournament that took place in Katowice, Poland, for a grand prize of $250,000 US. The incident happened regarding a match between the teams Virtus Pro and Cloud9. A few months after the tournament, in an interview with Cloud9 player Corey Friesen, also known as Semphis, he stated that he and his team were all on Adderall during their match, and then went on to say, or rather confirm, that everyone at those events takes Adderall. Despite Cloud9 not winning the tournament, or even advancing past the first round, this interview prompted major blowback from fans and the league itself due to the perceived effect Adderall has on gameplay, and the prize pool for the tournament being so large. And here's where we find the current state of esports. ESL was quick to respond to the Semphis situation, perhaps as an act of damage control, implementing a new policy that specifically called for a ban on Adderall along with a few other drugs, and introduced more anti-doping policies such as regulated drug testing for the players. The use of these substances and PEDs could now result in up to a 2-year outright ban from ESL and all related events. Cloud9 and Semphis were never punished though, because this interview was taken a couple months after the tournament and there was no way to prove the validity of his statement, although Semphis was not part of Cloud9 for much longer after. The use of these substances is still a hot topic of debate on the internet, even within certain leagues. Drug testing is still not implemented in Overwatch League, for example, and the rule regarding the PEDs is pretty far from specific. But here's the million-dollar question. How much does Adderall really affect someone's gameplay performance? In my research for this video, I hadn't seen any in-depth studies done, or any for that matter, so I've taken it upon myself to conduct some experiments revolving around that very query, so that we could answer this question with science, and this is what I found. Before we get into the thick of things, I want to give a quick disclaimer that I am prescribed Adderall, which is the only reason I am able to perform these tests. Don't try this at home if you don't have a prescription. It is highly illegal. Adderall is a Schedule II and controlled substance, which can land you in a lot of trouble from authorities if you're taking it illegally. I am diagnosed with ADHD, and I took Adderall for several years. However, I don't believe this fact would compromise the integrity of my experiments for the following reason. As I grew older, I somewhat outgrew my ADHD, or it became easier for me to handle, so I stopped taking Adderall as much and eventually stopped outright. I recently got a new prescription due to outside reasons, and this gives me a good opportunity. This provides me with the perfect middle ground of being able to reliably, safely, and legally test the effects of Adderall. But the fact of the matter is I am diagnosed with ADHD, and this test very well could be skewed due to that, so take this with a grain of salt. Okay, so in thinking about what Adderall's effect on the brain is, I developed a couple specific tests in different games to find out how much Adderall really affects a person's gameplay. I'll be playing a couple different competitive games and compiling the data from both of them while on and off of Adderall. I really wanted to be taking an in-depth look at the reaction time and my mechanical skill, which of course are interconnected, but I'm doing the best I can here. And one thing to note real quickly before we start is that I'm taking 25 milligram Adderall XR. And more info is on the screen here if you want to know the basics of what's actually happening with the Adderall and the methods I'm using for testing. During the testing, I made sure to follow a couple general rules. If you want some more specific details, there's going to be a link to all the documentation, results, and test data in the description below. I started out playing Apex Legends, with my testing marks being the amount of kills, damage, and headshots I receive. I set up some constants that I made sure to follow while playing, which are 1, I was only allowed to solo queue so I wouldn't have an unfair advantage due to the synergy with my teammates, and 2, I didn't choose my drop locations, I only let my squad do that. This is so I didn't unfairly pick locations that I'm good in, as well as gave me a nice range of hot drops and slower drops. So, on my off Adderall day, I began with playing 2 warm-up games, which I wouldn't be including in the final testing data, but I recorded them anyway, just to be thorough. I then played the 5 matches of testing data, took around an hour break, and then came back and played 5 more matches. After compiling the results of day 1, we can see that I'm sitting at an average of 1 kill per game, with my max in a single game being 5. Moving to damage, we find that our total damage is 2,642, giving us an average of 264.2 per game, with my max in a game sitting at 937. And finally we have headshots, which has a pathetic total of 9, with my max in a game being a measly 3. On day 2 of testing, I took my Adderall, waited about an hour and a half to allow it to reach a point of effectiveness, and then I started my first warm-up match. And from that match, I could already tell that my performance was better. In that warm-up, I had already outperformed or matched my average from day 1 in every mark, even surpassing my max headshots by 1. And during the day, I actually ended up winning a game, which is more than I can say for the previous day of testing, but I digress. In testing, I received an average of 2.2 kills per game, with my maximum in a single game being 8. For damage, I had an average of 544.7 per match, with my top in a game being 1,569. To put that into perspective, this right here is 1,569 Minecraft hearts. That's a lot of oofs. Continuing on to headshots, I got a jaw-dropping increase to 39 headshots total, with my max in a game being 10. So what does all of this give us?
Well, it shows an insane increase in performance, with kills increasing by 120%, damage increasing by 106.17%, and headshots increasing by over 330%.
If you'd like, you could pause the video right here to take a look at the raw data I collected, but also keep in mind that multiplayer games are extremely hard to have a controlled environment in, and the stats could be skewed due to that. Nonetheless, it is absolutely mind-boggling how one tiny pill can change a person's gameplay performance by such a large margin. But now, we're moving on to the next game. This is Aim React. It's a CSGO custom map created by Mr. Ulytical, and I found that it actually suited my needs very well. It has 3 different game modes to test and train your reaction time and aim, but I'll only be focusing on 2 of them. Time Attack, which has targets appear randomly on this board and gives you 30 seconds to hit as many as you can. And then we have the Reaction Test, which has you look at the red target in the center of the board and shoot it when it turns green. The Reaction Test has no time limit, so I gave myself 2.5 minutes to achieve the best possible time I could. I began with the Time Attack mode, playing 1 warm-up and then 5 rounds of actual testing. When I was off of the Adderall, I achieved a maximum of 39 targets hit in the 30-second time period, with an average of 36.8. Not too shabby, I thought. That's an average of 1.23 targets per second, I said to myself. On the reaction test, I achieved a maximum click velocity of 187.5 milliseconds, and again I thought, hey, that's pretty dang good. The tests on the Adderall were surprising to say the least. When I performed under the influence of Adderall, I scored a maximum of 43 targets hit, sitting at an average of 40.8 targets per round in my albeit small sample size of 5. And that gives us an average of 1.36 targets per second. Now, this I was already astonished by. It doesn't necessarily sound like a big change, but a difference of 1.13 targets per second is actually quite a large leap. On our final test, reaction time whilst on Adderall, my quickest reaction time was 125 milliseconds. This means that we improved our reaction by about 1/3 of the time, which is an insane time difference. And I think we can safely say, after looking at all this, that Adderall has a pretty vast effect on my reaction time. And we can finally put our question of the day to rest. When I began writing for this video, I didn't expect to be doing this deep dive into the effects and all this experimentation. I had initially planned for this to be a short video about Adderall's negative stigma in esports, but then I started to go a bit deeper and write more, and do more research. Honestly, there was a point in which I was going to do a full breakdown of Adderall's effects and get into some really heavy science, but I restrained myself and made it a bit simpler and shorter for the purposes of actually getting this video out on time. However, despite these tests being fairly basic in principle, there's still a lot of information we can glean from them. Before my testing, I was fully aware that Adderall had a decent effect on my personality and my focus, as well as my gameplay performance, but I couldn't have told you by how much and in what ways. What was even more astonishing was the fact that the margin of improvement was so large. Now here's the thing, there is any number of factors that could have affected this in unforeseen ways. The placebo effect, caffeine consumption, general attitude, my current mood, and countless other items. But I did my very best to keep these tests as controlled and fair as possible. Nonetheless, it's still fairly obvious that Adderall has a pretty large effect on my gameplay performance, as well as some other aspects that I didn't initially think of, such as my communication skills. I don't expect this video to solve any issues or cause any earth-shattering realizations regarding Adderall in esports, but perhaps it can provide some clarity to those who haven't really thought about this before. Do with the information what you will, but my job's done. I'd like to thank you all for watching this video. It's been a new experience for me, and I really hope you all enjoyed it. Have a good day.